Hey everybody, it's Rudy Basso, the co-owner of Don't Split the Podcast Network. I would like to encourage you, lovely listener, to head on over to our website and give a listen to my show that I host with my brother called Game O'Clock. It is a video game retrospective, introspective, other spectives, all about the kind of games that we love. And to be honest, we love just about every game out there. Game O'Clock released every Thursday. It's fun, it's short, and hey, you'll probably learn something about video games.
This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. This week on the show, we're talking with game designer Craig Campbell and amazing Adventurers League DM Allison Rossi all about railroading. Railroading gets a bad rap, but can it be a good thing? We are going to dive into that subject right now.
Okay, everybody, now I am here with two of my favorite people. I'm here with Craig Campbell and Allison Rossi. Today we are talking about railroading, but before we get to that, Craig Campbell, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Okay, well, thanks for having me by, James. I've been playing and game mastering for like 25 or so years. I've done a bunch of freelance game design for Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Iron Kingdoms. A few years ago, I started designing my own game, Murders and Acquisitions, which went to Kickstarter and funded and got fulfilled late last year. And I'm working on a new game, and so I'm playing games and I'm designing games, and I'm all over the place. And I'm talking to you on this stinking podcast.
And we should mention that people can check out on our YouTube channel you playing Murders and Acquisitions. We're recording this in the future right now, because we haven't actually played the game at the time of recording this, but by the time this airs, this will have gone up already, and that it will be released as a podcast later on our brand new podcast, DSPN Presents, which is one-shots, pilots, and stuff. So thank you so much for being here, Craig, and thank you for bringing us our topic today. I thought this was a really, really great one to talk about, so I'm super pumped to have you here. And then, of course, with us is the great Allison Rossi. Allison, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
So I have been involved with Dungeons & Dragons for only a couple of years now. I DM'd for Adventurers League for about 2 years. Also occasionally write some things on the side. I am also just, I guess you can call me almost like a Twitter personality in a sense. So you can find me mostly online doing those things. I also stream Dungeons & Dragons occasionally, and I just relocated across the country, so once I get an apartment set up, I will probably be doing some, Twitch things to help beginners get into D&D, so we'll see where that goes.
Excellent. Well, it is wonderful to have you here, too. One of the things that I like about you is you've probably DM'd as much as someone who has been playing for a decade, because you've crammed so much experience into so small sort of a D&D career as it is, and you continue to gain more and stuff. So it's great to have you here as well. Today we're talking about railroading, right? And Craig, you kicked this off with an email where you said, a railroad game, you think, railroading, right, gets a bad rap. And I think it's because we have this idea of when something is on rails, it limits player agency. Their ability to contribute to the story is not as good. That is the perception, I think, that we have, that, like, if the players want to go into a tavern and the GM wants them to go somewhere else, we say, nope, can't go into that tavern. That tavern doesn't exist. You got to go here, right? Which is not necessarily what that is. A railroad game, you say, can be a perfectly viable thing, as long as the GM doesn't make it completely linear, negate player choices, and just tell their story, right? Just tell the GM's story. Do you think this is true or false? And Craig, since you asked the question, I'm going to actually first turn to Allison and say, Allison, do you think this statement is true, that you can have a game that is somewhat on rails and everybody can still have a good time?
I definitely think that is 100% possible, especially because, like I said, I only have about 2 years of DMing experience behind me. And a lot of, beginning to DM is kind of railroady. You need to learn to play the game, and you need to learn to play it with a bunch of players you might not know at all. So I think that, having a game somewhat on rails is a great learning experience to bring people into the game. It's a safe way to get involved, with different kinds of people and learn to tell a story together until you get used to the different personalities and where you can potentially take things. Some people are really, really great at thinking outside of the box and finding clues on their own or driving the story themselves. And other people, they don't know how to do that yet. They haven't figured that out. Or perhaps, they're not really there for the role playing in the background. They're there for the combat. So I think that putting things on rails, at least a little bit, is great for everyone to start with. As a new DM, I kind of learned as I went on how to take things off the rails. So it's important to know, when you can take from a pre-made story or module, and then as you go on, you learn how to change things to fit your needs and fit your players and what they're looking for. So I think that, it can be really great.
Sure, yeah, I totally agree with this statement as well. And I think if your players need to have an open world where they can do anything, that is fine. But it's usually those players, the same way a GM who says, this tavern has blown up, you can't go there because I want you to go here, is kind of a jerk. Players who don't take offered story hooks and decide that they're going to do something else completely just for the sake of it because they can, I contend are also kind of jerks. And I mean that lovingly. I definitely have people in my group who do that from time to time. So, but yeah, that's sort of my feeling. Craig, this is your statement. Do you think it is true or false?
I think it's definitely, railroads are not necessarily the worst thing in the world. And I just want to throw out here to Allison, thank you for hearkening back and, for coming into it as you are from the first couple of years, early kind of run of GMing. It's like I'm 2 decades removed from those first few years where, everything was a little bit more railroady, and I would plan the crap out of stuff, or I would use pre-published modules that were, let's face it, from 20 years ago, in Dungeon Magazine, for example, a little railroady sometimes. The term sandbox, I don't think it even existed when I started. Not in the usage that we're used to now with video games. Something that a friend of mine once said here when we had this discussion, and I'm going to blatantly, I've ripped it off from him and I'm going to use it here, is a train ride can be great if the scenery is beautiful. It's like if the players aren't going to feel railroaded if they're pushed onto a train. Well, they're going to feel railroaded if they're pushed onto a train they didn't want to board. But if the train is going where they want to go, then they're on board. Then they're not going to feel railroaded. Or even if it is a little bit railroady, they're going to be like, okay, that's fine. We'll just get to station B, station C, and we'll do our things. There's a certain level of player agency or character choices that are being made that players want. But it can vary from group to group if the social contract between the GM and the players is such that, hey, I'm just going to kind of take you through this story. And when it's important, you're going to roll dice and you're going to accomplish certain things, and you might do things in a little different way than what I'm initially planning. But ultimately, you're going to accomplish goals A, B, and C in that order, but you might not accomplish goal B the same way I was kind of expecting you to. I'm going to belabor a metaphor eventually here, so bear with me. But we're going to talk a little bit about what is the railroad, and what are the cars like, and what are the different stations like, and what are the different things that you can do with that train, and at the different stations, and how you can approach that in terms of as an adventure. Like I said, if the players are on board, they're on board the train. If the GM is not comfortable improvising a lot, or maybe just wants to dip his toe into it every so often, then that GM will do it when they do it, and the players will go along with that ride.
I think there's a reason the railroad metaphor sticks, right? And I think you're right. It's totally possible to have a game where maybe you've got scenes planned out, right? Or you've got a dungeon in mind that you want to get the players to, and they're gonna meet with the king, and then they're gonna walk to the dungeon, and they might have a random encounter on the way, and then they're gonna go through this dungeon, clearing it room by room, for lack of a more creative example. But the way that they approach those things, right? The way that they talk to the king, the way that they negotiate what their reward will be for saving the princess from the mine, the way that they then approach the denizens of the mine. Maybe they go in stealthy, maybe they go in hot, and kick down the door and that sort of thing. There's a lot of player agency to be had, fun to be had in the details as a player. And I think that saying, look, this is how this is going to happen. You're going to go here, and then you're probably going to go here, and then you're probably going to go here. And the player's saying, that sounds great. That's what we want to do. I think is kind of a genius way to do things, and is kind of the way you see things done in organized play a lot, right? That in organized play, GM sits down. Sometimes they've just been handed an adventure.
Yep.
And you're like, okay, I've got 4 hours. I've got 4 scenes here. We're going here, and then we're going here, and we're going here. And I think the social contract then with the players is like, hey, you're giving up your time to do this. We just want to have a good time. We'll make it work, right? If you can provide a good time, we'll sort of, we're not going to jump off the train, as it were, which I think is great. Allison, what do you think, what does railroad mean to you? Let's define this then, because, in fact, let's define bad railroading, and then let's define good railroading. So what do both of those mean to you?
So I guess I would say that bad railroading would essentially be like, yes, you're getting on this train and it's going straight, and we're not taking any detours. We're not making really any stops that are outside of the norm. We're going to keep chugging along, and, whether you like it or not, this is the way it's going to be. But I think good railroading and what you start to learn as you're DMing is that sometimes, you change tracks and you go a different way. Maybe you thought you were going to go to B next, but your players kind of changed things a little bit and you go to C. You still might come back to B, but you're just going to follow what your players want to do. And I think that it's important with good railroading, so that it doesn't cause like a player resentment or anything, have them feel like they're driving or impacting the plot. It shouldn't just be you driving everything along, with them stuck with you. You should be having fun together, and you should be, making sure that your players are engaged with what's happening around them in the world. I think that, again, it's just a very safe way to get people into things. A lot of people come from, video game backgrounds where they're playing, and a gaming console game might not have the ability to go through all the different scenarios of what your players might do. But you as a person right there can change the story to fit them and still fit in plot points that are important. So I think that's kind of the difference between a good and bad railroading. Bad would be just, you don't care what they do, you're going to keep following that path, and good would be, adjusting as you go and still being able to keep it on those rails.
And I think it takes, I'm going to harp on this, I feel like. I think it takes the cooperation of the players too, right? To say, okay, we understand we've got a lot of agency here, but we also understand you've done some prep work and have something really cool in mind, so we're going to work within the frame of what you've provided. I think, good railroading is also dependent on the social contract with the players.
Yeah, I like the social contract that you keep mentioning, because it really makes sense in the fact that, they're sitting down at your table and they're agreeing that we're working on a story together and we should have a common goal as players. It's kind of like when I talk to people about player backstories or backgrounds, everyone ends up with these parentless, street urchins that somehow found their way to adventuring, but that gives the DM nothing to go off of. So I think it's important for people to realize the DM does all this prep work and they work so hard to present this story to you. Help them out, help them with the story, make sure things keep rolling. It's not just the DM telling the story, it's everyone cooperating together to tell the story.
I love that, parentless street urchins. That's very good.
Yeah, it's so like the common trope that you see all the time. No one has parents. Everyone's a street urchin. Somehow they have this horrible past and now they're an adventurer. Nothing happy, not a...
I play one of those every other year.
Oh my goodness. It's like teenage edgelords turned into a D&D.
But there's a reason, like if you think about all of our heroes, right, in comic books and things, they've lost their parents too. That's another podcast, though.
I'm the Batman.
Craig, what about you? What is good railroading and what is bad railroading? And also, where's the line? Where does the railroad become the sandbox and that sort of thing? Or is it more fluid than hard and fast definition?
Well, I think we've hit on, bad railroading. If it's overly linear, if the players have really no agency, as long as they have some and they're okay with that, then you're not quite so railroady. I think a lot of times the quote unquote bad railroading might come out of a GM who's not prepared to improvise, or in some cases is just really a planner. Is somebody who likes to just plan the crap out of it. Like, they get into the game so much that they want to sit down and try to figure out every eventuality, every possible route that the characters might take. And so now they've planned for it, and they've created this intricate web of things that might happen, and they have their favorite.
Right.
They have the one that they think tells the most interesting story. And so while they might give players some choices, they will also kind of engineer what some people refer to as illusionism, which is to say, like, to make the players think that they're making choices, but really you're kind of guiding them into what you think will be the story that's most interesting. And a bit of that is okay, but you walk a thin line where you might kind of tick off the players if you take that agency away, if they're looking for it. Good railroading, here comes my really overwrought metaphor. Think about a train that's on the tracks, and it's going to go from station A to B to C to D to E. And at each one of those stations, something happens. And while you're on the train, all the players can sit in the passenger car where the GM just tells them what's happening. But sometimes the players are going to go to the investigation car where they're going to have to look around for clues, or they're going to go to the role-playing car where they're going to talk to NPCs and learn things, or they're going to go to the combat car, which is just caked in blood and gore, and they're going to fight stuff, or they're going to go to the skill car where they're going to maybe break into a building and do some skill check-oriented things that aren't necessarily combat. And when they get to Station B, they might have to get information out of a town guard, and they could go to the combat car and beat that information out of him, or they could go to the role-playing car and trick it out of him or bribe it out of him. They can accomplish the things in different ways, and that's a little bit railroady, but the players are making their choices of how they're doing it, and the GM has that modicum of control that they want to say, okay, point B is get info from guard. How did the players do it? That's kind of up to them. So you're on the tracks, but you're playing in different cars.
I love that idea because I think one of the most beloved adventures of all time is Ravenloft, right? Curse of Strahd came out, and it's, people love that adventure, and it has the railroadiest beginning that has ever been given to an adventure. Mists come and surround you and whisk you away to a magical land that you can't leave.
Don't ask about the mists. Don't ask about it. Just go with it. Just go with it. Trust me.
It's the railroadiest railroad that ever railroaded a railroad.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If you don't whisk away, okay, well, you sit in the tavern, I guess, and wait
I guess
for
we're going to run a different module now, so everyone pack up while I go read a different book.
Time to break out board games.
Yeah, exactly. But then once you're there, right, once you're in Ravenloft, and particularly in Curse of Strahd, once you're there, you kind of get to approach how you want to get out. You've got to kill Strahd, but there's no time factor necessarily, right? You can walk around and do different things and that sort of thing. And so it is this hybrid, and like you're talking about, there are several ways to approach your problem. I love this idea of cars, right? There's the combat car covered in blood and gore, and and I think that's a great metaphor.
So you got the players moving around from car to car. They're doing different things. They're accomplishing their goals at A, B, C, D, and E stations. However, they need, in different ways that they need to. Maybe they don't accomplish the goal at station C, and they have to, and the GM rolls them along to D, and then at some point maybe you throw the train into reverse, and they got to get back there because there's an important point that needs to be dealt with there. Or you take the thing that was at station D or at station C, and the GM just says, okay, well, that weird tavern that they were going to go into and talk to the the frog dude in the back. Well, that tavern is in station D now. I just pick it up and move it to a different city or a different location or whatever it is, right? Because they never found it in state when back earlier in the story. That's like the baseline of improvising, isn't it? To just take the thing that you had planned that the players walked past or didn't engage in and just dump it into later in the adventure, later in that session, or in the next session, or make it a dream that they have to, they suddenly dream that they're in this place and they all have agency and they're talking to each other in a dream and they learn the thing and then they wake up and they're fully rested and they have their hit points and their spells and off they go.
Right.
There's somebody gives them a prophecy. They talk, you have the weird carnival lady or whatever, that provides some sort of prophecy that, or you meet up with adventurers on the road and one of them sits at the campfire and tells a story that's strangely appropriate and informative of what the adventure the characters are on. There's a lot of ways to hit the points that are at those different stations, and the GM knows what those points are, knows that they need to be accomplished in order to tell the story cohesively, but they can be approached in, how many different ways can you think of other than just different trains? I mean, you can move stuff around. There's a lot of ways to do it.
That's a really good metaphor because of the different ways to approach it. And you can think of your track as having multiple branches, right? And going to these different stations and circumnavigating some and going to others and switching signals and stuff like that is great. And I think one of the things I would say about this is when you do this, I don't even know that the players consider themselves being railroaded then, right? That it's sort of about having a loose enough flow with your story that you're okay moving things around, but also being prepared enough that, okay, I know I need to get them this, and I'm going to bring them this, and this will help me direct them. Allison, do you think the sort of game we're talking about, do you have players who get offended by this style of game and want to know why they can't go wherever the heck they want?
I think that kind of goes back to that whole social contract in that, all the players that I've had at my table understand that, my job as the DM is to guide them towards their goal and, do what I can to help them get there. If they want to go off of, my lead from whatever NPCs or dungeons or clues they get, that's up to them. But if they go completely, crazy off the walls, do whatever the heck they want, that, that probably won't be a good game for them or me because it's completely out of the blue. It's not expected and it's kind of not part of that social contract to play the game cooperatively. Obviously there's occasionally going to be that player that wants to do something completely different. And sometimes we can, between the players and we can find some sort of in between to do what they want to do. I guess it really depends on what the story is at hand. If you're in Waterdeep buying magic items, we're not going to suddenly end up in Thay tomorrow because that's where you want to go because of whatever thing that you just popped into your backstory that you just thought of at the table. So I guess you have to find that right spot between them having actual choice and then them having an illusion of choice in the game. So yeah, you obviously want them to feel like they're driving or impacting the plot, and you don't want them to feel like they have no say in what goes on. But again, it's finding that nice in between where they completely have a say and where you're making them think they have a say.
That is a very, very sort of genius way to say that. And again, the social contract is important. And I also think a lot of players know, look, I've only got 3 hours, 4 hours with my friends. I want to tell the best story possible. This person spent a lot of time doing this. It's probably the best story possible as opposed to me yelling, I want to hunt pirates now, and just, taking off for the coast and renting a ship. As a GM, I can do that. You know what I mean? I can improvise that and say, okay, you want to fight some pirates? We're doing it. But it's not going to be as good as the thing that I have spent some time preparing and thinking about. So I think the players, for the most part, know and understand that.
Hey everybody, wanted to take a quick break to let you know that today's show is brought to you by Warby Parker. Get a free 5-day home try-on at warbyparker.com/DSPN. That's 5 pairs of eyeglasses for 5 days, 100% free. Warby Parker provides vintage-inspired prescription eyeglasses starting at less than $100. Here's how it works. You go online, you pick 5 frames, you can try them for 5 days to see which one you like, you can buy them at any time, and then you return the ones you don't want. It's Warby Parker. You try on glasses without ever having to put on pants. It's pretty great. So check them out. warbyparkertrial.com/DSPN. That's warbyparkertrial.com/DSPN.
What about you, Craig? You know, you've got all sorts of experience levels at your table, and you've played all kinds of games. When you do that with people, do they call you out? Or are they like, hey, this is railroading, what you're doing to us right now? How dare you?
I've been lucky enough to, when I play like long-term campaigns or when I run long-term campaigns, it's typically like home groups. You know, it's friends, it's people that I know, it's people that I do stuff with outside of gaming. And so, you know, if it's somebody that's new to the game, I'll usually, I may say a little something about like kind of my style of GMing and everything to kind of get them on board. And it's a question of just kind of getting through the first few game sessions and getting to the point that, okay, they trust me, I trust them to trust me, and we can go from there. When I was running play tests, I was running a short campaign for Murders and Acquisitions a couple of years ago. I had the entire gamut of players at my table. I had people who were brand new, who had never played a role-playing game ever before at the table, all the way up to people that have been playing for 20 years. And I actually devised in order to test the gamut and to see what the players wanted, it was just a good way for me to do this. The first adventure was full on railroad. I told them right out the gate. I said, this story is going to take you from A to B to C to D, and I couched it in the idea that it's for the benefit of the new players. All they have to do is really kind of learn the rules right now. And then the next game session, I said, okay, it's not going to be quite so much like that. And then the next one was a little less. And by the time they got to the last session, when they were dealing with the big bad boss, it was literally a boss because it was a corporate style game. I told them when we started the game, I said, I have nothing planned. Here's your box text at the beginning that sets you on your goal. What do you want to do? Players adapted to that. And I think, if you're telling a good story, players will adapt to the way you're telling, the way you're bringing it to the table, as long as it doesn't like really offend them. Like if there's some people that they're just hardcore. I don't ever want to not have a choice. They want as much sandbox as possible. They want full sandbox all the time, and that's fine. And maybe they need to find a different GM if you're not that kind of GM. But if they can tolerate the occasional nudge toward this or that, where they know they're going to be able to make important decisions more often, but they're going to occasionally get nudged, and they can accept that, then we're good to go.
Yeah, and I think, especially when you're talking about a longer-term campaign, rewarding the players then by, in your prep, including the things that you know are important to them, right? Saying like, okay, so this session, I know this character, it's really, that this player really likes to do X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to make sure there's X, Y, and Z in here. Or this player's backstory, they've been dropping tidbits about this constantly, so I want to make sure that I get that orphan, their father is going to show up and talk about why they abandoned them finally. I think that strengthens then that relationship, because they say to themselves like, I am going to trust Craig's story, or I'm going to trust Allison's story, because I know that they are working in the things that I like and the game that I want to play. And you're right. For some people, what they want is the ability to go anywhere and do anything. And to those people, I say, try running a game.
Oh my gosh, yes, I need to tell that to more people. I think there's so few people willing to DM as it is, and they don't realize how much time it can take out of your week just to prep for one game each week.
Right, yeah, even if you're running right from a published adventure, you got to read the adventure, you've got to be familiar with it, and you've got to often, adapt, because that's the nature of published adventures. This one's for 5 adventurers, but I've only got 3, or whatever it is, And asking people to run a game who have this idea of you should be able to go anywhere or do anything may either change their mind, or maybe they'll let everybody do that and be the greatest GM that ever was. But I think a little railroading is a great thing. And it really helps everybody. I know my group, if I don't give them a hook, right? If I just said, or if I gave them 18 hooks and said, here's the world, stuff's going on here, 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 they wouldn't know what to do. They kind of like having, at least at the beginning of the session, right, a little bit of box text that says, there's a guy with a yellow exclamation point over his head standing over there at the edge of the bar. Go talk to him. And then, they like to take it and run with it, and we'll go from B to D to A to C, all that kind of stuff. But I think it's really fun. And I do think, Craig, what you were saying, and Allison, what you were saying about new players and new GMs, it is a really good thing to do. And I do think sandboxes can turn off new players because they're learning the rules, and then it's sort of overwhelming to be like, well, I what if I make the wrong choice? They already think that there is a wrong choice to make. And so slowly opening it up like you did, Craig, and slowly opening your own experience up as a new DM like you did, Allison, is a great way to do those things. It's just really smart. And I think I dare say that most published adventures use this module. Do you guys agree with that?
So I'm going to agree with that, or at least, if they don't, they should. I think the issue with too much of Sandbox comes in where players get into this game and then they have no idea what they're supposed to do. Like you mentioned, they're not sure, what should I do? Am I making the wrong moves? If they're a new player, they don't even know what all of their skills or spells or do. They barely know which dice to roll. So they're just overwhelmed with this new information, these new roles, and these choices. It's kind of like when you have an outdoor pet and you open the door and you let them go outside, and they go out there and they're just like, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. There's too many, sensations going on. There's information overload. Where do I go from here? With too much Sandbox, it's just kind of like, I feel like it's hard to prep for it. And then, you end up essentially pulling stuff out your ass because you can't prepare for certain things. You can't prepare for all of the potential scenarios. So you end up just improvising so much that it feels flat, where it feels like, they're making all their choices, but their choices might be really boring in the end. They might not be going towards a bigger goal. They might not be finding the right people to, say, find a dungeon or whatever it may be. Yeah, they're driving the story, but, is it as interesting of a story with complete Sandbox? It's hard to say.
I definitely feel what you're putting down there because I think when it comes to improv, I will sometimes rely on what's comfortable or things that I know will work. And if I'm prepping, I have more of a chance to think like, oh, you know what? I've done that before. And this group that I've been playing with now for almost 10 years has seen this several times. So I want to give them something new, and having the prep time lets me sort of shake myself of those old habits and say, here's a new story I want to try.
To quickly go off of that in terms of why, at least a somewhat railroaded campaign can be a good thing is, a lot of people have really busy lives and they don't have the time to sit there and prepare for all the potential things that you might say or do or what NPCs you might kill. Having a set module kind of helps these people to spend less time preparing. Like when I started DMing, I would spend so many hours a week preparing because I didn't know what I needed to prepare for. But I had this module that I could go off of, and I can kind of try to deduce what my players might do or where the storyline might move. As I went on, I would spend, an hour, maybe an hour and a half if I was going to do some sort of physical prop for a game. So, things get quicker as you go. But with Sandbox, I feel like, I don't know. You see these people on Reddit, they spend, hours, weeks, months doing this homebrew world that their players might only explore, a tenth of it, but they want to have it just in case. Each type of game style has its own pros and cons, railroading versus, Sandbox. A nice in-between is, I feel like, where you want to be.
Craig, what do you think? As far as published adventures go, do you think there's always a little bit of, well, not always, but in most cases there's a little bit of light railroading? And what do you think is a good GM style so you don't go crazy, but you also give players the freedom that they crave?
I'd just like to point out real quickly that I'm tickled by the term light railroading. I enjoy the fact. I enjoy that you've basically introduced a referendum to determine whether or not we will have light railroading in this campaign. Now, how do you get from the suburbs to the city? A little light railroad.
That's right. Little light rail.
I think Allison pretty much hit it on the head. You're on board with this. It's pardon the comments that we keep saying on board, everybody. But
whatever, I'm on board with these comments. It's okay.
It's I think the majority of published adventures, the shorter they are, the more railroady they can be. Often are, and like you said, James, that the more sandboxy an adventure is, the more it starts to actually feel like a campaign setting. And I'm going to say this: if you want a true sandbox, what you need to do is find a GM who has spent the last 15 to 20 years learning everything there is to know, everything you could possibly know about the Forgotten Realms, and then sit down and play in their game. Because whenever I see people asking advice about how do I run a sandbox campaign, invariably the first things that people respond to and say with this is, well, don't build the whole world, right up this corner of this kingdom. And then they say, okay, and the players say, oh, I've got a sandbox to play in. Well, you've got a little tiny sandbox to play in, which isn't a lot harder to develop than writing an adventure that's going to take you to 5 different locations in that corner of the kingdom. And then once the group decides, oh, we want to go over here, well, now the GM develops this corner of the kingdom, or takes you to the capital city, or next door to the other kingdom, or out on the ocean, or whatever it is. Like if you start out with that little corner of the kingdom and you tell the GM, okay, I want to get on a boat, travel down to the capital city of the kingdom, pay fare onto a sailing vessel to go to the eastern continent so I can fight ninjas. That's a sandbox. But if that GM doesn't have the ninjas figured out, probably what you're going to experience, if you actually do that in the game, is some subpar ninjas. You're going to experience, right in the moment, right there, some ninjas that GM was not prepared to design, has not spent the time on, that he spent preparing the other stuff, which was that corner of the sandbox, which, like I said, is not terribly different. It's just a lot more choices, but it's still a lot of stuff that's already kind of been planned. And that's what, in a railroad is the difference between that corner of the sandbox and planning the pieces of that corner, and a railroad campaign is just the order in which you experience those different locations, or those plot points. The railroad puts it in an order. The little sandbox allows you to wander around. Was there a second part?
What you're saying, though, is totally we need Chris Perkins to DM for us.
For everybody.
Yes.
Chris needs to clone himself
for true sandbox.
Or learn to co-locate and be in multiple places at the same time. But that's maybe a little beyond. Well, you know what? We can all pray for the singularity.
That's right.
And everybody can download a Chris Perkins, and we'll be good to go.
That's right. Every adventure you buy will just come with a Perkins that you can plug in, and he'll play it. He'll run you through it. Speaking of Chris Perkins, I remember in his old articles, he would talk about what he did for his prep for his game. And he would write one sheet of paper, write down sort of what he thought was going to happen in the session, and bits of story and NPCs and enemies and stuff that would show up. And he would use that as his outline to create hooks and guide the story and do that sort of thing. So, even Chris Perkins is riding the light rail, as it were, which I think is okay. And I think as a player, I love it when my, GM shows up and has a plan. So I think, now it's time to talk about from our player perspectives. Is this a thing that we enjoy? And I'm definitely going to say yes. Craig, is it a thing you enjoy as a player?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't mind it. I trust my GM. And if, quite frankly, if I play for a little while with a GM and I find that I don't trust them, I'm kind of looking for a different group. Usually it's one of those things that if I'm getting enough of what I'm there for, then the nudge to do this or a little bit of dictating. Okay, well now you leave here and you go to here, just so we can keep the story. I've literally had GMs say, okay, and so you guys leave and then you go to here and we'll just to keep the story moving, because we might have just spent like 45 minutes role playing, talking to a bartender that didn't progress the story. So he just kind of nudged us over to the story.
Sure.
And it's fine because everybody got their fun role playing, talking to that bartender,
exactly.
and having their little person to person, PC to PC discussions, and somebody got to perform magic tricks for the kiddies in the bar, and the bard got to perform, and the dwarf got into his drinking contest, and we're all happy. And now everybody looks around and says, okay, so I guess we go to sleep. And the GM says, yeah, you go to sleep, you get up in the morning, you have all your spells, your hit points, you get on the road, and now you're here. Okay, right. Roll. Adventure starts now. That's an exaggerated variation of that, but yeah, absolutely. I don't have an issue with it as long as I'm getting the things that I'm looking for at the game.
Exactly. And what about you, Allison? As a player, is this an okay thing for you? Are you fine with a little light railroad?
I'm perfectly fine with a bit of railroading. It doesn't bother me at all. And, as someone who DMs, I understand that it's hard to prepare for every possible thing that your players might do, whatever crazy ideas they come up with, or strange things where you have to stop in the middle of your session and go, I don't know how to react to that. I'm totally fine with being on rails and helping the DM tell their story, and, telling the story with my friends that I'm sitting around the table with. I have plenty of years of experience playing video games, and I'm used to things being completely on rails in a lot of cases. And I'm also used to a little bit more sandbox style where I can do whatever I want within the realms of this video game. So, if they're striking a nice balance between, that railroad and a little bit of sandbox, I'm happy. I like playing D&D, and it can be hard sometimes to find a group that you really click with. So if everyone is, enjoying each other's company, I'm fine with how the DM runs the game. And if I start to not like it for whatever reason, then, I'll just find a different DM or run my own game. I don't have that problem. I'm okay DMing if needed.
And I think one thing we should bring up, right? We've talked about this already, but is if you are an experienced player and you are sitting down at a table that has a new GM or has new players at it, and you're like, man, this feels a little railroady, that's probably by design, and it's good that new people are getting into the hobby. So relax, enjoy it, and a few weeks from now, you'll be sandboxing all over the place, probably. Anything you can do to help make new people get into the hobby is going to be good for all of us, because that's more people spending money on the hobby, supporting the industry, yada yada.
Eventually new DMs, hopefully, crossing my fingers.
Exactly.
And quite frankly, if you sit down at a table with a brand new GM and you're not prepared to cut them some slack, you need to find a different GM.
Right.
That's
or maybe go outside more and have different hobbies. Who knows? Your poor DM spends so much time preparing. Be nice if they're new.
Definitely great points all around. Well, I think that is probably going to do it for this episode of Tabletop Babble. But before we go, Craig Campbell, where can people find you?
Oh, people can find all about game stuff that I do at nerdburgergames.com. I'm working on a game right now. I'm actually going to be looking for playtesters for the upcoming round of Capers, which is a sort of supers games between G-men and gangsters set in 1920s Prohibition America. I've had this ongoing playtest group that has seen the game evolve, but they also have the experience of, they've figured the game out. Right. I want to give it to some brand new people to read it and play it and see where the holes are for the new players, for the new people that are reading it. Excellent. Looking through, is there something missing? So I'm going to be looking to do a much bigger playtesting. So you can go to nerdburgergames.com to learn more about the game. There's a blog page. There's a ton of information. You can email me at nerdburgergames@gmail.com. If you want to playtest, I'll be looking for people to do that in maybe a month or so. And it'll be about a 1 month turnaround, one adventure, read the game, make characters, provide feedback. And then you can go to drivethroughrpg.com and you can pick up a copy of Murders and Acquisitions, the game that I designed wrapped up last year. So there you go.
Nice. That is awesome. And it's a great game. As a person who has gotten to check out some of the rules for Capers, maybe even had a little hand in some of the
Maybe you wrote a little something for the game.
Maybe you wrote a little something for gamers.
A little something.
Yeah, it is an excellent game. Murders and Acquisitions is an excellent game. People should definitely go check out your stuff because it's great. And thank you for coming on and providing us with this wonderful topic today, Craig.
Thank you.
And Allison, where can people find you?
As usual, the main place you'll find me talking about D&D or lots of Overwatch is on Twitter. So you can find me. My Twitter handle is @charm__person. Occasionally, I am with a Monday night group on Roll20. That's twitch.tv/padfoot240. We've been kind of on a bit of a hiatus because I relocated across the country, as I mentioned before. So, that makes it a little bit difficult being in Airbnbs and trying to play, games on Roll20. I'm also in a way different time zone. It's so much earlier that we'd be playing. We have a guy in Australia, so it's a little difficult. But otherwise, like I mentioned at the beginning, once I get a solid apartment, I'll probably be streaming some D&D stuff on my own personal Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/Eloana.
That's awesome. Yes, definitely check out Allison. She's got skills, people. So thank you so much, both of you, for joining me today on Tabletop Babble.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great conversation with Craig and Allison. I always love having both of them on. They are so smart. Amazing interview. Thank you so much for coming on to both of you. Tabletop Babble is still a new show, and there's a great way you can help us grow. That's by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. Even if you don't listen to the show through iTunes, a lot of podcatcher apps find new listeners by relying on iTunes reviews. That's how they make their recommendations. So go leave us a 5-star review, make an iTunes account if you don't have one, and help out all of your other favorite podcasts that you listen to for free. And to encourage you to do just that, I promise that if you leave a 5-star review, I will read it at some point verbatim here on air. Make me say anything you want. Today's 5-star review comes from Becca Seraph. Seraph. Becca, thank you for this review, which is entitled A Great and Informative Podcast. Becca says, if you're interested in tabletop role-playing games, this is a great addition to your TTRPG diet. Well, thank you so much, Becca. It is a pleasure to have you listen, and thanks for this 5-star review. It is awesome. If you want to support the show financially, but you also don't want to spend extra money, there's a great way to do that too. Head on over to don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com and click on the affiliate banners for Amazon and for DriveThruRPG and use those whenever you shop. You just shop as you normally would. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and we get a very small percentage of the sales. If everybody did this, the DSPN family would be millionaires. So please go ahead, do that. Bookmark those links once you got them, because then you don't even need to go to don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com, but you probably should, because it's the greatest website on the internet. Except for, of course, worldbuilderblog.me, which is my blog where you can get tons of free 5th edition resources, and you can follow me on Twitter at James Introcaso. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. There's tons of other great shows at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com that you can check out. Great actual plays like Venture Maidens or Dames and Dragons. Great advice podcasts like The DM's Deep Dive, very similar to this show, or our wacky grab bag of one-shot actual plays and pilots and panels and things like that. That's over at DSPN Presents. Oh, you want a radio play? Well, guess what? We got that too. It's called Have Spellbook Will Travel. Do you like video games? Check out Game O'Clock. There's something for everybody who likes fun at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. Tabletop Babble's theme music is provided by BattleBards. You're listening to it right now. Remember that RPGs are like sex. As long as everybody's having fun, you're doing it right.
Hey, it's Mike Shea of Sly Flourish and author of The Lazy Dungeon Master and Sly Flourish's Fantastic Locations. My show, The DM's Deep Dive on the Don't Split the Podcast Network, features a one-on-one discussion with guests like Sean Merwin, Enrique Bertrand, Teos Abadia, and more. Once a month, we dive deep into a single D&D topic and answer your burning DM questions. Watch us live on Twitch, on YouTube, or on our podcast on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Let's dive deep.